The wind carries secrets across the dunes, whispering stories of those who walked here before us. Ancient sands hold memories, concealing truths that time has tried to bury. Here, where land meets sea, mysteries await discovery. On September 15, 1974, a jogger's morning run along Sandbridge Beach, Virginia, would uncover a mystery that would haunt investigators for 47 years. The sun was rising over the Atlantic, casting long shadows across the pristine shoreline. What he discovered, half buried in the shifting sands, would become one of the most puzzling cold cases in American forensic history. The morning that started like any other would end with questions that spanned decades. A woman's body, perfectly preserved by the salt air and sand, lay curled beneath a weathered piece of canvas. The natural elements had created an unexpected time capsule, protecting her from decay while hiding her identity. No identification. No missing person reports that matched. No fingerprints in any database. She existed in death but seemed to have vanished completely from the records of the living, as if she had never been. She was young, perhaps 25, with auburn hair and delicate hands that suggested a life far removed from these desolate dunes. Her appearance spoke of gentleness, of a life lived quietly away from violence. The only clues were her clothes, a blue floral dress from the 1960s, well made but not expensive, and a single gold ring with an inscription too worn to read. These remnants of her life told a story investigators struggled to decode. Detective Ray Morrison had seen his share of bodies, but something about this woman unsettled him. Her peaceful expression seemed to contradict the violence that had ended her life, creating an eerie juxtaposition that haunted his thoughts. Her peaceful expression suggested she hadn't suffered, yet forensics revealed she'd been murdered, strangulation marks barely visible on her neck. The contradiction between her serene face and the evidence of violence deepened the mystery surrounding her death. The medical examiner estimated she'd been dead for months, possibly longer. The sand had created a natural time capsule, preserving her features so perfectly that detectives were certain someone, somewhere, was missing her. The investigation began with hope. Surely someone this young, this beautiful, would be reported missing. Detective Morrison assembled his team, confident that this case would be solved quickly with the right approach and determination. Detective Morrison and his team canvassed local hotels, questioned transients, and checked every missing person report within a 300-mile radius. Their systematic approach covered every possible lead, yet each path led to a dead end. They found nothing. It was as if she had materialized from thin air, lived her final moments on these lonely dunes, and vanished from all human memory except for her physical remains. Local newspapers dubbed her the Dune Lady. Her photograph, taken during the autopsy but somehow retaining her dignity, appeared in papers across Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina, hoping someone would recognize her face. Tips poured in. Families hoping for closure about their own missing daughters called, only to have their hopes dashed when dental records didn't match. Each false lead brought heartbreak to families and frustration to investigators. Each false lead deepened the mystery and Morrison's obsession with finding the truth. The case consumed his thoughts during the day and invaded his dreams at night, becoming a personal mission rather than just another assignment. Years passed. Detective Morrison retired, but he kept a copy of the woman's file in his den. Even in retirement, he couldn't let go of the case that had defined the latter part of his career. New detectives inherited the case, each bringing fresh perspectives and new technologies. The torch was passed from one generation of investigators to the next, but the Dune Lady's identity remained elusive despite their best efforts. In the 1990s, they tried facial reconstruction, creating a clay bust that toured police stations and community centers. The technique represented hope that new methods might succeed where traditional investigation had failed. The hauntingly lifelike sculpture drew crowds but no real answers. People stared into her reconstructed face, searching their memories, but none could provide the crucial identification that would solve the decades-old mystery. Someone had to know her, yet she remained anonymous. The frustration of knowing that somewhere, someone held the key to her identity, yet remained silent or unaware, tormented every investigator who touched the case. The dawn of DNA technology brought new hope. In 2003, investigators extracted genetic material from bone fragments, creating a profile that could theoretically identify her or link her to living relatives through scientific advancement. But DNA is only useful if there's something to compare it to, and the databases of the early 2000s held no matches. The Dune lady's genetic signature sat in digital limbo, waiting for the right connection. Detective Sarah Chen inherited the cold case in 2015. Unlike her predecessors, Chen had access to genealogical databases that were revolutionizing forensic investigations, offering new possibilities for solving decades-old mysteries. She uploaded the Dune lady's DNA profile to public genealogy websites, hoping distant relatives might have submitted their own samples for family tree research. This innovative approach had solved other cold cases through genetic genealogy. The technique had solved other cold cases, but it required patience and meticulous detective work. Chen knew she was embarking on a journey that could take months or years, following genetic breadcrumbs across generations. Chen spent months building family trees from partial DNA matches, following genetic breadcrumbs across generations. She traced lineages through immigration records, marriage certificates, and census data with painstaking attention to detail. Each connection brought her closer to the truth, but progress was maddeningly slow. The Dune lady had become more than a case file. She was a puzzle that consumed Chen's off-duty hours and weekend plans. In March 2019, Chen received an email that made her heart race. A genealogist in California had been researching her own family history when she noticed DNA similarities to the Virginia Jane Doe case. The genealogist's great-grandmother had emigrated from Ireland in 1922, settling in Philadelphia. Could there be a connection? Chen immediately began tracing the Irish immigrants' descendants, mapping out a complex family tree spanning multiple states. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in October 2019. Chen discovered that the Irish immigrant's granddaughter, Patricia O'Malley, had disappeared from her Philadelphia apartment in early 1974, matching the timeline perfectly. Patricia was 24, had auburn hair, and worked as a seamstress, explaining the well-made dress and delicate hands. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to align after 45 years of mystery. But why had no one reported her missing? Why had her disappearance never made it into any database that investigators had searched? These new questions emerged even as the old mystery began to unravel. Chen drove to Philadelphia, armed with questions and the weight of 45 years of mystery. The journey from Virginia to Pennsylvania felt like traveling through time, bridging decades of unanswered questions. She found Patricia's former neighborhood, now gentrified beyond recognition. The elderly landlord who'd owned Patricia's building was still alive, though barely, representing a crucial link to the past. In his cluttered apartment above what had once been a corner grocery, he remembered Patricia O'Malley with startling clarity. She was quiet, paid her rent on time, and had no visitors during her brief tenancy. She'd simply stopped paying rent 1 month, and he'd assumed she'd moved without notice. In 1974, such disappearances weren't uncommon, especially among young women living alone in the city. But there was more to the story. The landlord's records showed that Patricia had a sister, Margaret, who'd visited occasionally. Margaret had learning disabilities and lived in a state institution, unable to advocate for herself. When Patricia disappeared, there was no one to file a missing person report. Margaret couldn't advocate for herself, and the sisters had no other family to notice Patricia's absence or demand answers. Patricia O'Malley had vanished from Philadelphia without a trace because no one with the capacity to search had noticed she was gone. She fell through the cracks of a system that didn't protect the vulnerable. Chen located Margaret O'Malley in a long-term care facility outside Philadelphia. Now in her 70s, Margaret's face lit up when Chen mentioned Patricia's name, showing that love transcends time and disability. Through tears and fragmented memories, Margaret revealed the sisters' tragic story. Their parents had died young. Patricia had worked tirelessly to support them both, visiting Margaret every weekend until suddenly, the visits stopped. Margaret had asked facility staff about her sister repeatedly, but no one had taken action to investigate Patricia's disappearance. Her concerns were dismissed as confusion rather than genuine worry about her missing sister. The investigation into Patricia's murder led Chen to Virginia Beach, where she discovered that Patricia had been corresponding with a man she'd met through a pen pal service during the lonely winter of 1974. James Crawford worked construction and had promised Patricia a job at a Virginia Beach hotel if she'd relocate. Phone records from 1974 showed Patricia had called Crawford several times before her disappearance. Crawford was now 78 and living in a nursing home, his mind ravaged by dementia. The man who likely held the answers to Patricia's murder could barely remember his own name or the events of yesterday. Chen sat across from Crawford in the facility's sterile visiting room, studying the man who likely held the final piece of Patricia O'Malley's story. His eyes were vacant, his hands trembling with age and disease. Occasionally, he would focus on Chen with startling clarity, muttering about the girl from Philadelphia, and how it wasn't supposed to happen that way. These lucid moments were brief, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Crawford's former roommate at a Virginia Beach boarding house provided the missing details. In 1974, Crawford had talked about a woman coming to visit him, someone he'd promised work to at the local hotels. The roommate remembered Crawford returning to their room one night in February, agitated and drunk, muttering about having to take care of a problem. His behavior that night had been strange and unsettling. The next morning, Crawford had scratches on his neck and dirt under his fingernails. He'd burned clothes in the boarding house's backyard, claiming they'd been damaged at work, but his behavior suggested something more sinister. The pieces finally assembled into a coherent narrative. Patricia O'Malley had traveled to Virginia Beach in February 1974, trusting a stranger's promise of employment and a new beginning, only to encounter deadly violence instead. Crawford had likely killed her during a sexual assault, then panicked and disposed of her body in the remote dunes where he'd worked construction. The sand had preserved her for 45 years, waiting for justice. Chen arranged for Patricia's remains to be transferred to Philadelphia for burial beside her parents. Margaret O'Malley, despite her cognitive limitations, insisted on planning the funeral for her beloved sister after decades of separation. It was a modest service, attended by Chen, a few facility staff, and Margaret. But Patricia finally had her name back, and her sister could say goodbye properly after 47 years of wondering and waiting. The inscription on Patricia's weathered gold ring, revealed through new forensic techniques, read, "Forever Sisters," a promise Margaret had given Patricia for her 21st birthday, symbolizing their unbreakable bond. As Margaret placed flowers on the freshly covered grave, she whispered the words she'd waited decades to say. "I never stopped looking for you, Patty. I never forgot. Her voice carried the weight of unwavering love. James Crawford died in the nursing home 3 months before Patricia was identified, taking his full confession to the grave. Justice would come in the form of truth and remembrance rather than legal prosecution. But the Dune lady finally had justice of a different kind. The justice of a name, a story, and a sister's unwavering love. Detective Chen keeps Patricia's photograph on her desk as proof that persistence pays off. The dunes of Sandbridge Beach shift constantly, erasing footprints and burying secrets. But some stories refuse to stay buried. Patricia O'Malley's case reminds us that behind every cold file lies a human being whose life mattered.